Hello, I'm Kats, and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about the latest iteration of a challenge tournament. Yes, they are back, and they are associated with the Community Week's Titan event for 2025. So we have a Fire Night tournament featuring the Telerian League, I believe is the official name, and that is the Bannerlords, the High Elves, the Sacred Order, and the Barbarians. So if we take a look at the tournament itself, there is nothing super special in this one. Obviously, the Titan event points up to 100 or up for grabs. I do recommend if you are going for milestone 4, milestone 5, you probably don't want to skip this, just because I think there are going to be other events that are probably more worthwhile to skip. But nonetheless, this one is fairly exclusive in terms of being Fire Night with only these 4 factions. But as we will see with the team that I have prepared for you guys today, I don't think it's going to be that hard for a majority of people. And in fact, I think a lot of people, everyone can be able to copy the team that I'm going to showcase for today. But yeah, there's nothing super special. The 5 essence is pretty nice. That's mostly more of an end game thing towards buying souls and the soul merchant. So I'm definitely going to try and go all the way out there to 2750 for myself. But if your goal is just to get as many points as you need for the Titan event, then 2050 is definitely the place to stop. This is kind of one of those standalone ones. So there's no void shard here. There's no prism jewel, prism soul thing going on here or anything like that. But once again, as I always say, make sure to check your group and see if it's relatively easy, because if you're able to place in the top 4, you could walk away with some pretty decent relentless gear. In this case, you can see for my group, people are fairly competitive. This is like the first day or so, and they're already basically done. So I'm not going to try and fight for the top spot, but I am going to try to end at the 2750, as I already mentioned. Now let's hop over to the dungeon itself and talk about the best stages to farm. As I always recommend for challenge tournaments such as these, you typically don't want to do hard mode unless you really want to push the extent of your account. Obviously, there are a couple of freeze champion options, and I'll mention a couple of them when we start getting into the team comp, but that's just going to be very difficult, especially stage 10, but even stage 6, stage 1, I think it's just not worth it. It's a lot easier, more worth your while to focus on normal mode. So if you're focusing there, then the bestest gear is going to be stage 25. The most efficient stage, meaning the most points per energy, or the highest level of points per energy, is going to be stage 20. And then stage 16, if you're kind of more progression, early game, mid game, and you still want to get it done, then you can do stage 16. It's Void Affinity, much easier to do, and you still maintain your chance to get 6-star gear. In my case, the team that I have to showcase for you today is as follows. We have Yakarl, we have Arbiter, believe it or not, in a dungeon team. We have Deacon Armstrong, we have Ferrican the Fat, and we have Fenax. And so essentially, we're using Yakarl, who you can get from the clan shop, as our primary turn meter control champion. When we get to the boss, you can provide decreased speed as well as turn meter steal 100%. We have Deacon Armstrong on the team as well for the turn meter manipulation on top of the debuffing capabilities with the AoE decreased defense. We have Ferrican the Fat in there, of course, for the ally attack to help us break the shield. We have Fenax, who's just kind of a generic DPS slot. If you don't have a +4 empowered Fenax, you could probably use Alice, the Wanderer, if you have her built up on your account, and which could also be helpful because she can lock out the waves with her abilities, and she hits pretty decently hard. But this is just basically any DPS fill in that slot. And then Arbiter, of course, you get her from the Arbiter missions, and believe it or not, she is pretty useful in this particular team. One, she's like kind of the fail-safe in case anyone does happen to die. We get some bad RNG across the waves. She can revive them, but more importantly, increase attack so our nukers can deal more damage. And then the weaken on our A1 helps us do more damage against the boss, so we'll get to see that in action as well. Let's go ahead and see this team in action, and I'll talk a little bit about the AI overrides. I do spend probably too much time like kind of optimizing my teams, but in this case, Deacon Armstrong is actually free reign. He's allowed to do whatever he wants because he just kind of works. We kind of just spam our abilities throughout the waves, and he just kind of cycles through it so quickly that it doesn't really matter to limit him. And Fenax, I think I have him kind of free reign, except I turn off his A3. It's just a weaker hit compared to the A1 double hitter, and we're going to have a debuffs on all the enemies, so he's always going to get that double hitter. Arbiter basically has free reign. I think I did turn off her revive for the waves because I want her to place as many weakens as possible so we deal more damage, as you can see there on the A1. And then I think I left her A2 on. I might have turned it off. I don't exactly remember at the moment. Yakarl, I think I have him on opener, don't use on the AoE freeze ability, so we can start off by freezing them, but I want to have it ready to go for wave 2 once we get there. Ferrican the Fat, I think the only restriction I have on him is that I turned off his A2. We don't really need the poisons or the burns. They're not really going to be, the enemy mobs are not going to be taking that many turns, and so it's just not as important. But maybe I could use it. I could probably turn it on for wave 2, just because on wave 2 I do turn off his ally attack, because of course we're saving it for when we get to the boss. But pretty much rinse and repeat. It's just kind of a DPS race here, so to speak, against the mobs. And then, you know, Fenax does the bulk of the work, and then Karl does a little bit of secondary nukage, so to speak, and then primarily kind of the control for the waves with the AoE freeze, which you'll note is it cannot be resisted if they have a high amount of turn meter. And where that comes into play is that I do have Karl open with his A1 on wave 2, such that Glaciate the A3 is ready to go on the second turn, because by the time they get around to the second turn, the mobs are closer to having a full turn meter, thus I don't have to worry about 3% resisting on the freeze. So here we go. Wave 3 is where we're kind of having everyone basically open with their A1s. I think Fenax opens with his A2, because the ally tech comes in here and breaks this, and then he has a chance to place the decreased speed right off the jump, and then Karl comes in and starts yoinking the turn meter. So basically, once you have that going, it's pretty much it's over. The fight's done. I think maybe there's like the 3% chance that Karl doesn't steal the turn meter right away, and that could be unfortunate. But that's kind of what Arbiter is for. If the rare case that something like that does happen, she does have a revive, so she can pick people back up, and then Ferrican the Fat, of course, can eventually get back to his ally attack and break the shield once again. So obviously that run would take quite a bit longer. But yeah, I think we'll go through the builds a bit later, but you'll see there's a lot of cooldown reduction in this team. We have some reflex sets, or yeah, just some reflex sets. But we don't need Karl's A3 here. It doesn't really do anything. You can't freeze the boss. It's not hard mode, so that doesn't really matter. So I turn that off. And then everyone else is basically having free reign with their abilities. Once again, Ferrican the Fat, although basically the entire time we're not using Ferrican's A2, because the boss isn't going to take a turn, ideally. So we don't really need the burn and the poisons and whatnot. And we want him to cycle through the ally attack as much as possible, as we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about his gear set. So yeah, not a bad team. I think just under 3 minutes, which is kind of my target window for challenge tournaments such as these, because, you know, we're limited. I can't use the best of the best champions necessarily. And I know some people might think, you know, I'm being somewhat cute here by just using 3 epics, but I think it's just partially just the way they're built, but mostly just they work for the purposes of the dungeon, and they fit in the restrictions. So like debuffers, they're, you know, across a bunch of different factions, it's easy to have debuffers, but when you start limiting things, epics might be your only options in certain cases. So it was either Deacon or Stag Knight, but I found that the decreased speed was a little bit redundant with Karl, because he is the primary decreased speed champion. Decreased attack would be helpful, but as you saw, basically the enemy combatants were always frozen for the most part. They're in the wave, so we don't really have to worry about them hitting us. And again, when we get to the boss, most of the time, outside of 3% resist, we're going to be stealing his turn meter, so he's never going to get a turn. But even if he happens to, Arbiter is not going to get one shot. Don't have to worry about that. She's built relatively tanky, and so we have that fail save as well, so we don't really need that. And I'd rather have the turn meter manipulation from the Deacon Armstrong that kind of helps us helps the team stay in motion. So now let's go ahead and take a quick look at the builds on the champions on this team, starting off with our very important ally attack champion, that being Ferrican the Fat, who is notably in a reflex set. As I mentioned during the run, we do primarily turn off his A2, which allows a lot of the cooldown reductions from the reflex set to go towards the ally attack, which just helps the team do more damage. In particular, it helps Fenax do more damage because he has one of the hardest hitting A1s in the entire game. But yeah, in terms of the stats here, we have 43,000 on the HP, 3,300 on the attack, 3k-ish on the defense, 277 on the speed, 99% crit rate, shame on me, 156 on the crit damage, and 320 on the accuracy, which is a bit overkill. I think you realistically only need around 250 for dungeons, normal mode dungeons, but in this case he's built for other pieces of content. Hard mode Fire Knight was kind of the origin of that build. In terms of the blessing, Phantom Touch, Fire Knight again in mind, Curse City, as well as normal hard mode Fire Knight, just, you know, extra hits into the shield if I'm running him with other ally attackers. But because he's not on one of my core teams any longer, I did not actually complete his masteries, but of course he's like the perfect champion for standard debuffer stuff. Master Hexer Sniper, right side of the support tree, left hand side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master. That would probably make sense if you are using him on one of your core teams. Next up, we have Deacon Armstrong, who's just kind of in a generic speed-ish build, divine speed, and 2 pieces of feral, which is kind of like perception, I guess, in that capacity. But nothing super special in his kit, or in his build per se, but 67,000 on the HP, 3,700-ish on the defense, 292 on the speed, so fairly fast, but of course that's primarily because of the speed sets. 500 on the accuracy, way overkill for this particular fight, but that is so that he can land stuff in the arena, like tag team arena is what we're talking about here, not live arena or classic arena, anything super serious. But blessing on him, cruelty, like I always say, I like to run cruelty on my debuffing champions because they already decrease defense, so we might as well do it a little bit more with the blessings. And then these are essentially the masteries that I would run on Ferric and the standard debuffer stuff. Right hand side of the support tree coming down to Sniper and Master Hexer, and the offense tree coming all the way down to War Master, hugging the left hand side. Next up, we have my Fenax, who is in a lethal set with nothing else. Total stats here are as follows: 44,000 on the HP, 6.3k on the attack, 2,600 on the defense, 252 on the speed, full crit rate, 311% on the crit damage. Of course, that is a lot of the blessing, empowerment, etc. that is propping up his stats, and then around 300 on the accuracy, which is kind of more in the ballpark of what you'd want for normal mode dungeons. And again, his slot on the team could be any nuker who fits the affinity of whatever stage you happen to be farming. For the blessing, I opted for Crushing Rend. Ideally, he'd be 6-star to have the ignore defense on every single attack, but for now, just having on the initial hits works, and hopefully he'll become 6-star eventually. And then for the masteries, he is built like a nuker. I used to use him a little bit more in the arena. Sometimes I do use him against like Wukongs. I can just kind of put him into the ground, but I digress there. Support tree is what I opted for because I did build a little bit of accuracy in his kit such that he is still kitted for any sort of epics only or challenge tournament such as this one right now. And then the offense tree, we're making the circle through here, but ultimately ending on Helm Smasher to ignore as much defense as possible. Next up, we have my Yakarl the Scourge, who's in a reflex set with perception and 1 piece of feral for the extra accuracy. This is my Dark Fae build, if you were curious about that. So that's the purpose of the reflex set, to reduce the cooldown of the turn meter steal ability against the Dark Fae. But total stats here: 41,000 on the HP, almost 5k on the attack, 215 on the speed. I wish that was a lot faster, but reflex gear ain't that good. Full crit rate, 223 on the crit damage, and then 411 on the accuracy. Again, this is optimized more around Doom Tower Hard, which would be 350s, a little bit above that. The one feral piece is kind of pushing him, the extra 40 accuracy is pushing him where normally he'd be around 350 or so. For the blessing, I opted for Brimstone. Again, this is with Doom Tower Hard. In case the Dark Fight does get a turn, whenever she does whatever active ability, we get a Brimstone proc, so that just helps do more damage and speed up that fight if we get the bad RNG, if we're taking a turn at all. And then for the masteries, an interesting take here. He's a little bit of a like kind of nuking type stuff here at the start, but then we're looping around through Cycle of Violence to come back to War Master, because again, for me, he's primarily a PvE champion optimized around the Dark Fae. And support tree, only thing notable here is that we want Lower Steel for extra stats, and then Evil Eye to reduce the turn meter when we use her A1 against the Dark Fae. And for him, Sniper, Master Hexer doesn't really matter. You could opt to go for those if you really cared, but the decrease speed, ideally, again, the Dark Fae doesn't get a turn, so he's going to keep it up there entirely, so it doesn't matter if it's 2 turns or 3 turns. And then Sniper doesn't really do anything because he has a 100% chance to place any of his debuffs, or they are the freezes in the kit, which cannot be amplified by the Sniper mastery. And then last up, we have my arena build for Arbiter, and of course, triple speed, full speed is what you want to see on your Arbiter, ideally, if that is your speed champion, and she is in my case. But 87,000 on the HP, 3,100 on the defense, 379 on the speed. That is my fastest champion, mine account, if you were curious. And then a mix of accuracy and resistance, 330 and 310. But again, she's optimized for speed. And I guess a little bit of a flex here, but I did manage to get my second ever quad roll on speed recently on my Divine Speed helmet here, yet to be glyphed. So realistically, she's probably somewhere 380 something speed once I get more 6-star speed glyphs to put on that. But yeah, intimidating presence, of course, on the blessing, 4-star. Lucky that I got that from a soulstone way back in the day somewhere a few years ago. But of course, booster aura weakens the enemy aura, which is really strong in a lot of arena contexts. And then for the masteries, support and defense tree, of course, because this is kind of arena optimized support tree. A little bit of the turn meter stuff for the buff she places, Lower Steel for more speed, and then timely intervention because we want her to get as much turn meter as possible, especially after people die, so she can pick them back up and keep the fight going. going. And then for the defense tree, this is kind of my standard anti-Siphi route. It's meaning we have Wisdom of Battle, so we can't get we have a chance to not get permaslept by an enemy Siphi, like in the case of Live Arena. And then Resurgent, of course, to remove debuffs when you take damage. And then we're coming down through Delay Death to end on Cycle of Revenge, again for more turn meter to help her get more turns. So yeah, like I said, I think this team is pretty accessible to most people. You know, we have 3 epics that you probably will get eventually. We have 2 free champions, one being Arbiter missions, the other being from the clan shop. So I think this is probably the most accessible team that I could have come up with, aside from swapping some of the epics. But you know, in terms of just other champions you could use, Ronda could be a good wave DPS. If you have Stultus, he could do that. He's bad affinity for stage 25, but he nonetheless can do that. Stag Knight, of course, somewhat interchangeable with Deacon depending on your preference and survivability of your squad. Archmage, if you need this AoE stun, he could be helpful. Moving along here, Yannicka, another option for wave nuker, and also you can get her from the clan shop. I did have Royal Guard in the initial iterations of the team because he does have like a quad hitter which can help you break the shield, and then the enemy max HP hit is pretty useful as well. But I found that he basically only did the enemy max HP hit once and during the wave 3, and so like it was just more efficient to just have Fenax just keep ally attacking or getting the ally attack from Farrakhan instead, just to have him A1 more, and we basically go past what the enemy max HP cap is. And then honorable mention to Neldor, who can work if you're trying to venture into hard mode. He does have that freeze synergy on his A1. And then also if someone else places a freeze, like Yakarl, for example, he can trigger his passive to proc his A1s. Tyrell, a different debuffer that you can also use. Sacred Order, not that much. Armiger, of course. Armiger is like, you know, the budget cold heart, so to speak, turn meter suppression on the A1, enemy max HP hit on the A2, and it's a lot easier for him to hit the cap, and so he could definitely work if you don't have your Carl yet, for example. Lady Noelle, good support if you want to, instead of Arbiter, if you want to have another source of freeze control, keeping your team alive. Alice, I mentioned her. If you do want to use her, just like Yannicka, you can run her instead of Fenax for the wave DPS. And then for the Barbarian, Silda Drakes could work if you kind of go more of a save type team. You want the AoE stun, she could definitely do some work. Valkyrie counterattacks, but you'd have to be relatively slow for normal mode for that to work. But yeah, there are some options across all the factions, but I do think this is probably the best that most people could aim for, depending on who your DPS is. It could be faster or slower and whatnot. And plus, I think it's kind of cool to see Arbiter, like, you know, outside of the arena context, actually being useful, at least to me, in PvE content for the first time. So yeah, there you have it. That's going to be my strategy for the Telerians only Fire Night tournament. Let me know in the comment section down below what your team is if you're going to be participating in this challenge tournament. Hopefully you do have an easy group and you can get yourself some of that sweet relentless gear. And as always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel, and feel free to hit that subscribe button down below as well if you are enjoying the content overall on this channel. Thanks for watching and have a good one.